So today's session is going to be brought to you by the Association of C&Ps. This is our professional organization of certified nonprofit professionals. So one way our association supports its membership is by hosting events like these on topics that are relevant and on our minds. So this will be a really great treat. And also, these events are always free. Always free. If you'd like to support the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance, we'll also post a link in the chat so that you can donate if you feel so led. We would love your support to continue to offer these free events. And I will now introduce our speaker as we continue to let people in. Again, feel free to ask questions in the chat. We will have this recording available shortly after we wrap up within about the week. So now I will introduce our speaker. So today's speaker is Tekoah Boatner. She will guide us in this series on innovation at the intersection of sustainability and wellness. Tekoah is a CEO of Youth Oasis. She excels in developing cultural-based models that are flexible, scalable, and responsive. And she is a regular presenter at local association meetings, business groups, and other human services organizations. And so, without further delay, it is my pleasure to welcome Miss Tekoah Boatner.
Thank you, Jaleesa. How is everyone? That was a wonderful introduction, and I'm going to take a snip of that and send it to everyone else and say, you have to beat that or be better, or I won't come on anymore. I'm teasing. Hi, all. I am, you heard a little bit of my bio. I am a board certified human services practitioner, certified nonprofit professional, and a project management professional, which all seems like things that shouldn't go together, but that is the job of human services because you end up having to do a lot of that stuff. So my background really comes from a human-centered perspective that drives a lot of the work that I do. Making all of these things that seem contradictory work together in harmony, and understanding that a thriving organization means a little bit more and an expanded view of how we've seen it in the past. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. What does it mean to integrate sustainability and wellness within your organizations and still be innovative, which is a word that I think has kind of lost its meaning over time, but can change. So let's get going. What we're going to talk about today, what you'll walk away with, is understanding how to define thriving as a metric for your organizational wellness and sustainability. You'll also understand how to explore innovation strategies and identify values-aligned and culturally relevant practices, along with understanding how to apply the 6 pillars of workplace thriving to drive innovation and impact. I will have tools and things available at the end for you because when I present, I like to give people something to take with them to actually do it, because how many of us sit through these webinars and go, oh, that was a great idea, and the minute it's over, you go, I don't even remember what that lady said. So hopefully you'll be able to remember what I said because I'm giving you something to help you do it. So what does it mean? This is where we'll start. What does it mean to truly thrive at work, right? Sustainability is survival because we link sustainability to financial metrics. So that leaves us in that mindset of surviving that next grant, the next program, the next number or client or whatever you do. But thriving is true liberation. Thriving is, if we want to describe it as such, the flow state of work. You're not really concerned about all of the things that's going around you because you found that magic middle, if you will. You're moving from fixing burnout to designing for wellness. Burnout is not something that you'll be able to prevent, so to speak, but the idea is to design for wellness as opposed to responding to burnout, just accepting the statistic that after 8 years in human services, you're gonna burn out, right? Well, how about we not? Let's just design differently, right? So innovation is an adaptation. It's not invention. You don't always have to create something new to be innovative. It's how you adapt it within your environment. And then thriving becomes your strategic compass. the difference between a map versus a compass, right? Like your map is pre-designed. It already has markers. It already has monuments. It already has roads. But a compass tells you what direction, and you build your map as you go. So that's what we're talking about. So we want to reframe sustainability. Our traditional view of a sustainable organization is your financial capabilities and your environmental structure and organization equals longevity. We're going to expand that into financial sustainability, because obviously, yes, we need money to operate. That's the thing. Environmental sustainability, does your environment support what you do? Can you adapt to your environment? But we also need to include operational sustainability, how we do what we do, and then human and cultural sustainability. How we do what we do doesn't matter if we don't have people to do it, and those people don't feel valued and cared for within the sustainability of the organization. So all of these things are interconnected, and the idea is that wellness flows across all of these domains. So thriving as a metric, we measure what matters, right? So why you want to measure thriving is because, again, we're moving from being reactive to being proactive, and it's going to improve your retention, it's going to improve your creativity, and it's going to improve your impact. And it centers equity, care, and connection. So it's the outcome of the aligned innovation, wellness, and sustainability strategies and practices you have in your organization. That's what it means to measure thriving, right? Is the alignment of all those three things. So what helps you do this is understanding the 6 pillars of workplace thriving. So what does that mean? That is the things you want to be looking at when you're looking at the structures of those 4 areas that we just mentioned: financial, operational, human and cultural, and environment, right? So rest, replenishment, and healing built into your operational structure. And I just want to put a note here: healing is the evolution of trauma informed, right? Okay, so competitive compensation, you hear it a lot. You have to mean it. So personal note, as mentioned, I'm the CEO of Youth Oasis in Baton Rouge. We're a youth services agency, direct care, right? So that means homes, kids are living with us, things like that. When I first joined the organization, my employees were making $8 an hour. I felt like that was absolutely appalling, right? And I don't know if you've noticed this in the landscape, but the people that we have in positions of care, the people who are caring for the most vulnerable citizens, we pay the least. That makes absolutely no sense. Ask what your daycare teacher is making. Ask what your nursing home CNA is making. They're taking care of people you love, and we're not showing it, right? And so when people talk to me, when I talk about us raising our salaries, and they go, well, how did you do it? My first answer to that is I decided to. What I hear with these conversations is, well, we can't afford it. Have you decided to do it? As opposed to just being blown by the environment and saying you can't afford it. Have you committed? Do you believe that your employees deserve better? If you believe it, and then you decided you're going to act in concert with those things. This is what competitive compensation is a decision. It starts with a decision, right? Trust-based relationships, professional development, the alignment of values, and belonging-centered infrastructure. These 6 pillars are what what creates workplace thriving. We're gonna go through each of them, and then you're gonna see where you are and where you need room to grow. Why? No, that's not what I said. All right. Here. All right. Rest, replenishment, and healing. So the question you want to ask yourself when you're thinking about this: so what practices signal to your staff that rest is respected, right? This is beyond, PTO and leave structures, right? So things like restorative time off, things like mental health access, things like normalizing breaks, right? It is little habits, little cultural shifts that signal to your staff that you prioritize rest and replenishment. That, one really solid rule that we have is I am not going to ask you for work when you're off, period. Right. And as director, when I see my staff who I know is off and they're emailing me about work, I'm going to not email them back. I'm going to text them and say, get out my email inbox because you're off. And no, ma'am, we're not doing this today. Right? Not because I don't appreciate that they're hardworking and they really care. I can't do anything useful with you if you are burned out. You took the day off, please be off, right? Little things like that. How do you incorporate mental health access? Do you normalize breaks? If you're in a fast-paced, food-based security, you do meals, you do pantries, do people swap shifts, right? Do you, after 4 hours, as opposed to waiting 4 hours, maybe you do two on, two off, something like that, to give more time throughout the day. Think of how you could do that. Trust-based relationships, what does that mean? Relational leadership. How you manage power differentials. It's a bit different, a more expanded version of servant leadership, right? Which is what contributes to a lot of us leaders burnout, because we're already in helping positions and we're serving not just your clients. As if you're a leader, you're serving your staff, you're serving your stakeholders, you're serving your volunteers. Don't be a parent, right? Because you just serving 24 hours a day. So, but the key to relational leadership is understanding that there's a power differential, respecting it, and then managing it throughout the day. Transparent communication. Transparent communication is inclusive communication. We like to lean on need to know or protective communication to exclude people. Stop doing that, right? There are ways that you can include everyone on a protective level that shows you are also transparent. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a project manager. I use a RACI chart, which is who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, who's informed. And that chart is shared with everybody. So people already know, you know what, I can know this factor, but I can't know that factor. And the reason I can't know that factor is because of, if you're in school, it's going to be FERPA. If you're in medical, it's going to be HIPAA, or whatever the reason may be. But you've been transparent because you've also shared the limitations of how you can communicate, right? Peer accountability, scale your power out and through, not up or down. All of us bring our lived experience or lived expertise to the work that we do in some capacity. So how do you use that as a source of power for all of your employees? Peer accountability. And then flexible resilience, right? You're building in building the acceptance of situational resilience. Now, I have to say here, I am also a adverse childhood experiences trainer, and the word resilience is absolutely overused, but outside of it being overused, I want everyone to understand that resilience is a tool, right? It's a skill that you build based off your environment and tools that you gather through time. It is not, you are born with a measure of it, but it can increase or decrease based on your experience. But understand that the ability to be resilient changes based on the environment. So you might be able to expect resilience in one aspect, but in another you can't, right? Consider that and build in that as a norm. That's how you build a trust-based relationship. Competitive compensation. Are your pay practices aligned with your mission and values? One example I use is, I don't know if y'all have heard of the ALICE study, right? Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed by United Way. So when they first rolled that out, great. It really highlighted what most people understood about poverty, right? Most people are working. Right? Is it the myth that there's all these unemployed people? There are a lot of unemployed people, but by and large, most people are working, right? They're just not able to afford life right now for whatever reason. But my question to United Way, when they first rolled this out, I was like, okay, well, did you raise your staff salary? Not being spicy, I am a spicy person, but again, it's one thing to say a thing, it's one thing to live a thing, right? And to my surprise and great relief, they said, yes, we do. Great, yay, great, tool I'll use, right? So, because I need to know that you believe in the thing that you're giving. right? So pay equity. Are your pay practices aligned with your mission and values? Pay equity, advancement opportunities, value-based bonuses. We have a thing where if I ask you to do something extra, I'm going to pay you for it. I'm not paying you a lot, right? Again, being transparent. I don't have it, but I understand that I'm asking you to do something outside of the scope of your job description, so I want to compensate that. All right, so professional development, skills building skills. I tell all of my employees, I want you to leave here better than the way you got here, right? I want you to know more when you leave, and I'd like to contribute to that. Mentorship, pairing newer employees with older employees. It doesn't always have to be an external party. It can be, but if you have older employees that can kind of shepherd your newer employees, that builds cohesion in your team, and it also helps cement belonging, right? And then lived experience as leadership capital. We often lean on external measures of expertise, i.e., all the letters. When I'm in a more casual setting, I say, yeah, I got letters behind my name, but I really don't remember them and I don't feel like going over them, right? Not because I did not work hard for these things, but because ultimately my lived experience has contributed more than that demonstration, right? And so instead of leaning so heavily on that, especially if you are in a direct service capacity, again, we work with youth. So we have peer advocates. We value them highly. People who came through the system, you are valuable to us, right? So we're going to hire you. We're not just going to say that. We're going to hire you. If you work in homelessness, you work in housing, hire people that have been through those systems and then train them so they are just as competent and professionally sound as somebody that came in with the 50-11 degrees, right? Okay. So alignment of values. What does this mean? Are your values felt in daily decisions or just printed on a wall? Again, same thing. We find all the great motivational posters and speakers and we line up those things, but your actions and will show whether or not you actually believe it. Mission clarity. Purpose-driven roles, story sharing for connection. What does it mean by mission clarity? I am the type of person, we're not gonna do the same thing we did for 20 years just because that's what we did. So we changed our mission like probably 5 times after I got there, not because the mission wasn't great, but because it wasn't specific, right? Your mission is what you do. So we were doing a whole bunch of other stuff. I was like, okay, so wait a minute, let's make the mission clear so that we can then have clarity in our roles. We can take that line off our job descriptions of all other duties as necessary. We don't need to do that because we're very clear about roles and the mission and how they operate, right? And again, when I say I'm going to pay you for extra things, I'm asking you to do something outside the scope of your role, and I'm going to connect that to the mission because it's clear and we spent time doing that. Not just busy work. When you're hiring people, you're not hiring people to do things for you. You're hiring people to solve problems with you. That changes your perspective on who you bring in and your clarity and your alignment of values, right? Belonging-centered infrastructure, culture of inclusion, equitable systems, responsive policy designs. All of that means that you are looking at the needs, the values, the experiences of all parties, right? Human-centered design is empathy-based, it's empathy-driven. Your things that you do within your organization have a multi-directional impact. You're doing something to someone, with someone, and for someone, right? Consider all of those things. And y'all, yeah, put your questions in the chat. And if I'm speeding a little bit because I pack a lot in here, so I want to make sure I get through everything. But please drop your questions in and we can revisit anything that's unclear. Innovation drives thriving. I am a big fan of the pivot, right? Sometimes we just have to pivot, and sometimes constraints require us to do that. Innovation can emerge from constraints. You can have your staff leading your community rooted practices. Why? Because your staff live in the community, right? So talk to your staff about what they're seeing when they leave the container of your organization, right? That can spark some sustainable change. And if you are trying to be innovative and you are ignoring wellness, you're going to be less, you're heading straight for burnout. You're heading straight for staffageddon. You're heading straight for things that could be prevented. And so we need to include those things. And so what I want to take a minute here is go over something I created called the spheres of authentic values. And so what does this mean? So now, okay, I guess a little slight shameless plug. I have a podcast. Podcast is called Breaking the Binary. And what the podcast is about leading authentically. It takes one of my rabbit holes, which is philosophy, and it connects how some of these principles can actually lead you through dealing with some of the constraints. Also, again, for us in the nonprofit area right now, it's a little tight, right? We're having hard conversations, we're having hard things, and I wanted to honor that and give us a tool and a framework to work through it, right? So what does it mean for spheres of authentic value? So you're going to go through your core values. That goes in the middle, 3 concentric circles. And I do have a longer worksheet on my website about this, but in the middle, you're going to put your core values. What are your core values? These are your non-negotiables, right? For us, one of our core values is being youth-centered. I really don't care how the adults feel. I care what the youth feel. Period. End of story. That is a core value for us that's not going to change, and it can't be swayed by the winds of the environment, right? So that keeps you steady. That is your plant. And then the next circle, you're going to think about, okay, so how can we be strategically flexible given our constraints and our core value? Where can we move something while keeping our core values solid and then respond to this external pressure, right? That should then leave you to your outer circle, which is creative possibilities. Okay, so what does that mean to be creative? Case in point. So actually, the last podcast episode that we did, I was working with another leader and we talked through it, right? So let's say you work in a cohort of other people and transparency is a core value. Well, we as an organization can't share our youth information because they're in state custody. We're not allowed to do that. So how do we participate in data sharing and be transparent and still protect our youth's identity, because that's a constraint that we have to honor, right? So what is the strategic flexibility? And what we arrived at is, okay, the coordinating agency is going to create storytelling templates which allow us to speak to the outcomes and impacts that our youth who are participating in the program receive, and does not require their identity, right? And when we report on these outcomes, we can simply de-identify the information. That's the strategic flexibility. And the creative possibility was the creation of the storytelling templates, which can be used across multiple environments, right? That's what it means to find your pivot. That's what it means to have constraint drive innovation, and how to map that out. Okay, so case study time. So what does it mean? Thriving in practice. This is just one example. There are many others, but I'm going to go through this really quickly. It's a lot of text, but a mid-sized organization that I work with, they provide street outreach, case management services. And of course, again, you're working in direct services, you're going to have some burnout and some staff turnover, right? Especially amongst people who are out there all the time. They were overextended, response to crisis response, especially when you have crisis response, inconsistent hours, emotional fatigue, things like that. All right, so how did they start, right? They started with some listening sessions. You need to understand, which means you first need to listen, right? Having a series of facilitated dialogues with the staff to understand. So these were the things they talked about: having unpredictable emergency call-outs, right? Back-to-back client intakes, and then a lack of decompression time between field work and documentation. I am also, I call myself, I'm just a case manager in disguise. That was my first foray. So a lot of this comes from that direct client work and understanding that connection is your superpower with everything. But that much people time, especially for an introvert like myself, is absolutely draining. And so I had to figure out my personal system for getting through that. What I'm helping us do today is not every employee has the wherewithal to do what I did. So just build that in for them, right? Understanding how to do that, those back-to-back client intakes, and then your decompression time. So what does that look like? They came up with some collaborative redesign. So the staff, not the leadership, but the staff proposed a schedule model, which had recovery days that were built into the schedule. So there was no client-facing duties. It was used for documentation only, team debriefs, or wellness, right? There was a choice. Rotating flex weeks. What was that? That's a 4-day work week every third week for all direct staff. Now, part of that transparency and mission alignment is, so for your office staff, or like, see, me now, I'm in the admin office now. I'm not direct staff. I don't get 4-day work week. Well, I can't be mad about that, right? Because it ain't for me, right? Same thing. So, but that's transparent because you're going to have employees. You can't say, well, it's because they do something different. Take the time to actually communicate why that's necessary, right? So your other staff don't assume that they're not going to feel jilted. They will, because people are people. So get ahead of that and go ahead and say why, and manage the expectation. You don't have to get rid of it because somebody doesn't like it, but what you do need to do is communicate it with care, right? And then some crisis coverage teams to reduce the pressure on individuals responding to crisis. This could look however you want if you're trying to come up with something different yourself. So what do? They implemented, they piloted it for 3 months, because you need data. You need to see if it actually works. So to track the emotional fatigue, and they use the share reflection tool. It's just a Google spreadsheet, right? Google form leading to a spreadsheet. Somebody looks at it, right? And then you adjust. Get comfortable with adjusting. Again, we get kind of stuck because we crave predictability mostly. But if you're working in the human services field, and if you're in nonprofits, more than likely you have to adapt, right? And you want to adjust, and you need to be able to do that quickly. You don't always have the luxury of consistency, unfortunately, right? So what were their outcomes? There was a 20% decrease in burnout symptoms, improved documentation accuracy and timeliness. And let me tell you, if you are a person that has to review documentation, that is worth its weight in gold. I can tell you how many faces I've made at notes. It's not cool. And also, this is another way you can tell that symptoms of burnout is starting to increase. So if you have case managers, right, or anybody that's required to do staff notes, if you start to see the length of the note decrease, they may be happy, fine, calm, but a month ago you got full detailed notes: who, what, where, when, how, why, and what's next, right? Great. And then the last note you get was, I saw the client today, they was cool. It's time for lunch. Have a meeting. They're not okay, right? They're in the yellow zone. They don't even have the ability to tell you what happened. All they want to say is it was fine, and we met, and that was that. That's a signal. Don't let it go by. Increase morale and retention, especially amongst your BIPOC and LGBTQ plus staff. Okay, so restorative scheduling doesn't mean working less. I want to be clear about that. Nobody really worked less. It meant working sustainably, right? With shared power and how time and energy is managed. That's really important, y'all. Looking at the time that we have and how to be purposeful about the work that we have. Even running a 24-hour organization, right? When your staff, when your clients live with you, that is what you have. You have to manage that, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that you work less, but you can work intentionally. You can work purposefully. And if you take the time to study that, you can probably find more pockets of rest than you thought. Tool time. Okay, yay. So I put a QR code so you can snap that and get it for yourself. You'll need to make a copy of it. This is just a wellness innovation audit, right? Really simple. You can go through it. Conversation starter, right? So does our budget, yes, your budget too, does our budget reflect investments in wellness, right? Do you build in mental health, professional development? Do you build in rest, right? Another example, one of the things that we do, again, we work with kids live with us. So we have something called trauma leave. What is that? That is when you have a kid that is fighting everybody in the house, right? Now, because of the way we train our staff and all of that and the way we work, the kids don't fight us, right? They're not fighting you, they're fighting their roommates and whatnot, or the other kids in the house. So the staff is fine. But managing that for your staff takes a mental toll. And I understood that. And so whenever there was an incident like that, or something similar, a crisis, you had a kid that may have taken something they needed to do, something that activates one of those biological responses. I told you I'll do ACEs. So fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or the 7 Fs that they've created now. That entitles you to a 2-hour break. You can take it that day, you can take it the week of, right? Something to recognize that you just been through something that shifted your brain patterns, and I want to honor that and recognize it. Are we diversifying our revenue to reduce burnout from short-term grant cycles? That is a big thing in terms of diversifying revenue. That I feel like is a big phrase and keyword for a lot of the guidance out right now, and in general with most nonprofit strategists, which I guess I consider myself one of those too. But it's a phrase that kind of just makes me itch a little bit when people say, well, diversify your revenue. What does that mean in practice, right? Like, yes, different grants, different models. And of course, my big thing is your nonprofit status is a tax designation. It is not your business model. So you first may need to go back and actually build one, right? And say, okay, who pays for what it is we do? But that's what it means to diversify your revenue, so you're not having your development staff burn out because they're chasing the next dollar. Are your financial decisions guided by values of equity, sustainability, and transparency? So this guide is going to take you through all of these. Do you have systems to pilot, evaluate, or scale staff or community-generated ideas? Any program that we have starts out as a mini pilot, right? And so what is your system to do that? How do you do that? Because also, when you write a grant for a program, you need to be able to have some data, but you also need to be able to afford it, and you need to be able to know what it's going to look like in practice, right? So create a system around that. Then it's going to go through employee management and experience, those job descriptions, things like that. Programming in your community practice. Our services designed with, not just for those we serve, right? Again, with, not for. Do we compensate for lived experience and story sharing? If you're asking participants to share their stories, give them something. They did not need to take their time out of their day, month, week, whatever, to share information with you, right? So compensate for that. And then your policies, again, we're talking about an integrated view of thriving. So all areas of your operation and governance, not just the speech, not just your culture guide, which if you do not have one, please have one, create one. Your culture deck, your culture guide is how you do what you do. That includes a decision-making matrix. How are decisions made? Does your staff know how decisions are made? And that includes policy. Do you have policies that support rest, equity, and flexibility? Are your SOPs, your standard operating procedures, and yes, your policies need to lead to an SOP, because your SOP describes how you do the work that supports the policy, right? All these things connect. Are they accessible? Are they trauma informed? And are they updated with staff input? So every once in a while I send policies out. Hey, is this still accurate? Do we need to change it in any way? And does your board support wellness-centered practices, sabbaticals, flexible goals, things like that? And then identify 2 areas to prioritize in your next quarter. Thriving is a design choice. It is not a side effect. Again, we're talking about being intentional, and innovation is the path and wellness is the destination. So when we integrate in our purpose, our people, our processes, we sustain ourselves and our mission. And so I'm curious, what is one shift or that you're feeling called to make in your organization, and how you want to go through it? I made it this time. Y'all, I cannot tell you how many webinars I do and I do not finish because I have so much in it, but I made it this time. Okay, so now we can have questions and talk and all that good thing. Here's all my information, a little QR code at the top right. You can find my website and all that stuff. It'll have more things on my website. Each tool that's in here, so the Sustainable Wellness Audit tool, if you missed it the first time, here it is again. And then the Strategic Spheres tool, this is actually the longer worksheet to accompany the graphic that I showed earlier, in case you wanted. So, questions, thoughts, comments, songs, interpretive dances.
Thank you for sharing all of this. We do have some questions in the chat. Thank you for sharing your insight. I don't know if we'll have any interpretive dances, but who knows? Maybe they'll come later.
I throw it out there every time, hoping.
Okay, so at this time, if you all have any final questions, please feel free to add them in the chat. And thank you so much for these QR codes. I'm going to start with the question we had at the top of the chat. Do you have any tips on how we can continue to keep in mind this lens of thriving while navigating significant cuts to funding and shifts in the environment we're working in that are out of our control?
Yeah. So again, one thing that I always start with is acknowledge what it is, right? You know, this is not the time to call for resilience. This is crazy right now. It's a bit much. Starting with January was a month. I don't know about y'all, but so in my email inbox, sometimes I want to burn up, right? Because of the things that change rapidly. So one, recognize that it's different and it's a change and we have to deal with it. Some practical tools then you can build in from that. If you are managing the money, so what we did was we do 90-day, but we have done 90-day budgets this year, right? What is that doing? That's keeping us from going, right? You know, because a change is coming. Okay, and then looking at all of the information that's coming through, not everything is going to be relevant to you. So again, use your filters, right? I would limit your communications to the industries that you work in. Right. So that's because that's going to be actionable for you. So how that helped us is the grants that may be subject to some cuts. Those grants are in that 90-day budget. If this grant gets cut, what do we do? Right. So I have about 3 budgets, right, built on those 90 days. If this grant goes, how do we shift? If this grant goes, how do we shift? Now, again, going back to that diversifying revenue, one of our strategies has been understanding the mission clarity, right? So with the mission clarity, what that means is how I write grants is that all of my employees are portioned out across those grants. So if I lose one, I don't lose a whole person. I only lose 25% of a person, right? These are the ways that you build that into that. And so understanding, using some of these practical things to manage your anxiety, that's the key, right? Managing your anxiety so that you can be real and authentic with what's going on. But I do encourage you to use the spheres of authentic action to really kind of go, okay, if this happens, what can we do about it? Where can we be strategic and get ahead of it? Practice it. Don't just hope and pray and wish. Practice it. Yeah.
That's really good. Thank you for sharing that. The next question that we have is, considering that it can take time to iterate a new process, how can an organization prevent burnout while they're in the process of framing for wellness?
I have to go back and say, acknowledging the elephant in the, like, okay, and just, okay, who's burnout, right? Now, also having a really good, clear definition of that. And we also want to be clear that sometimes what your employees or what you may be feeling is not necessarily burnout. And I'm flaking on what this is called, but it's like institutional drain or something like this. The definition of that is, it's not so much the work that's burning you out, is that you are in an impossible industry. I liken this to teachers, right? Like those poor babies just want to teach the kids. And school is such a thing now. Like, I'm like, my kids are in school now. I'm like, I do not remember school being this difficult. How did we mess this up so much? So or you're in a hospital, you're going to have certain constraints, right? So it may just be that the environment is such that the constraints within the environment is hampering their professional capacity. When a person who's employed can't operate in the way that they want, that leads to a feeling of burnout. And it's not so much that, oh, the job is hard, is that I'm not being effective. So some of that really could be, how can we help you be effective within the constraints that we know you can't get around, because we can't get around, we have to do that. So I think acknowledging it, and then if you can, finding immediate ways. There is always something you can do today. I promise you, right? So if you're talking to them and you have staff that are burned out, okay, today is the day to look at that schedule for the next month. Look at your schedule, look at your projects, look at who's assigned to what, right? Okay, who can you move? Who can you shift? Who can go home for a week, right? There are some operational things that you can do today, but again, it starts with acknowledging that you want to do it, but being realistic. Yes, we are working. We have things that we need to accomplish. So let's be clear about that. Now, if you go and you have to now find everything that's happening for a month, well, you're burned out too, probably, because nobody has this written somewhere, and that's a problem. We need to fix that, right? So some of this is simple organizational design, right?
Got it. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. So we have, I think, about 2 more questions, and that'll probably be the time that we have. So the next question that we have is around unlimited PTO, and this is just more so wanting to know your thoughts, because it can be seen as a benefit, but sometimes the workload doesn't support the utilization of it. So just kind of, what might be your thoughts around unlimited PTO?
So I think unlimited PTO is a wonderful idea. I think it's a wonderful idea because I'm a fan of all things that absolutely turn our expectations of workplace culture on its head. Yeah, I'm the rebellious elder millennial, if you will. But it needs to be managed, as everything needs to be managed. And so that's going to, again, go back to, are you clear about your workplace needs so that you can communicate those expectations? I've seen examples where organizations have chosen to give unlimited PTO, and they put in a policy on how to access it, which lets the employee know this can be denied, right? Or there's a certain, if you know that if your organization, God bless you, if you are an organization that does a gala, right? Clearly, gala season is not the time to be taking PTO, right? You're not. And so the thing is, how can you be flexible, right, within offering that? We chose not to do unlimited PTO in our organization. Again, we're 24 hours. There's just some things we cannot do. And also there's some data that shows organizations that have unlimited PTO, people don't take them. They don't take it. So if you do that, you also have to consider that, right? Also, what tends to happen with unlimited PTO is there's no more payout of it, right? So you're going to have to communicate that. Again, with everything, it starts with, all right, what are the basics? What are the facts? What does this look like? Gathering your information and having a conversation with your staff and with your decision makers. Okay, let's look at our environment. What are we expected to output? How can we reasonably accommodate that? And so for us in our organization, what my staff decided is, well, actually, rather than unlimited PTO, we would like the ability to cash out PTO at various times throughout the year, as opposed to waiting it. We also got rid of our sick time. So we no longer have sick time. We have vacation and we have PTO. The reason we got away with we got rid of sick time is because sick time requires documentation. And honestly, I really don't want to see your doctor stuff. I just don't. I don't need the conversation. I don't need the practice cough. Just stay home. You don't feel like it, you don't feel like it, right? Now, what has happened with that is I end up with a staff that I have to force off, right? Because so it's, and I will do that like the first quarter of the year. I'll say, I don't see your vacation on my calendar. What's happening? Let's get to it. Because when people don't feel treated like a pawn and they don't feel treated as just a number, they tend to be able to bring more of themselves at work, and it's a little more enjoyable. As you know, our thing is the work is hard. We work with youth in foster care and OJJ. The work is hard. We should not be that, right? Like we don't need to contribute to that with foolishness, with schedules and things like that. I want you to reserve your energy for cursing out caseworkers. I'm sorry. That's just kind of how that is. But you know, we have to do that sometime. So I would rather you have your energy there than with me, right? Because of some inflexible rule I've created. So all that to say, with it, be clear about what it is. And so because they don't take off a lot, they was like, okay, look, I'm gonna cash out my PTO. Now, what does that look like? So we build in rules around that. You can only do it once a year, and it is subject to funding availability, right? We may not have the freedom to do that. So if we don't have it, you can't do it. You still retain it. And then what is the, backstop to that? Okay, you actually get to carry PTO over, because we don't carry PTO over, we carry vacation over, right? So if you lose your PTO every year if you don't use it, unless you cash it out. But if you choose not to cash it out because we can't let you cash it out, then you get to carry it over. So it's just being flexible in your approach. Just be realistic, though, about what it is you're also, what are you trying to accomplish when you say we want unlimited PTO?
And our final question, before we wrap up, is do you have a recommendation on how often we should be reviewing policies as staff for revisions, etc.?
Biannually, at the minimum. Quarterly only works if you have a lot. But let me be clear here. Your policies are going to be pretty consistent. It's your SOPs that change, right? Because your SOPs detail process. So that is probably going to be a more like a monthly review. And even then, not a full review, because at your monthly staffing meetings, you're going to you should be able to always connect what's happening to a policy, right? So if you're having a conversation at your staff meeting, and I'm going to ask this, right? Oh, such and such happened. Okay, so what policy is that? That's this policy. Do we need to change it? So right then and there, we know there's a policy that needs to be changed. Or the conversation is, well, no, I don't think the policy needs to change. I think the process needs to change. So then that's a change for the process, not the policies, if that makes sense. So, but just like your basic, like your board policies, you only need to do that annually, and your board should be doing that, not you. But your staff policies, your organization policies, the overall review, maybe about, once a year, once in the middle of the year. But your SOPs probably more frequently, maybe monthly, or whatever your meeting cadence is. So if you have a quarterly meeting, remember to always connect what's happening to the policy that supports it.
Got it. All right. And then this is our final question that just slid in here. Do you have any recommendations for onboarding new staff?
First recommendation. Whatever your initial orientation time period is, add a month to it. I'm sorry. Here's why. Especially now, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise in the air. They are not getting what you're giving right now as clearly as you think, right? They are concerned with, especially if you hired them transparently and said, okay, so you're under this grant. I don't know if it's going to, they're concerned about whether or not they're going to have a job in 6 months, right? So add a month to it to reinforce what you've learned, right? Always, if at all possible, have a shadow period. And that's where that mentoring goes. Somebody else needs to know what this person is doing. We also have a rule. There is no one person that is self-contained. Somebody else, including me, right? So my directors hate it because I send them my full budget. They go, wow, I can't read this. You finna learn? right? Not, you know, I may have, which has happened, right? Like I had a kid, I gotta go. Somebody else needs to be able to see this and translate it the way I do. So I'm gonna take time to explain that to you. But there should always be somebody else that knows what a person knows for continuity of knowledge, right? So have a shadow period if at all possible, to see how they work in practice and offer that immediate coaching, right? You're going to have your end of period review or what have you, but nothing quite hits the same as being able to see it and address it in the moment, right? And of course being appropriate and oriented to time and environment, right? You're obviously not going to do it if they're involved in a participant interaction, but immediately following or shortly thereafter to say, hey, I noticed how you did this. We would actually prefer it be handled like this, given the correction wherever that is. So yes, that's what the big thing is add a month. Just add a month.
Good. Add the cushion, add the month. That's good. All right. Well, we are okay. We got one more final question. This is the final one before we wrap up. So Becca mentioned that we have a policy for pay equity. The highest paid person cannot make more than 20% more than the lowest person. Any ideas on pay equity?
I think I love pay equity, right? I think that's a great thing. We don't have a number target for us. I think the number target is great because it keeps you honest and it keeps you something to shoot, gives you something to shoot for. For me, it's just, I mean, I do the budget. So it's just kind of like, am I too far ahead? Like, I don't want to be, there's just no big gap. That's kind of way I look at it. Like, there's just no huge differences in any of the salaries, right? I also do try and make sure that salaries are in line with the median area salary. So I'm looking at some data to support those decisions. The nonprofit compensation report, beautiful thing, pay for it, or be connected to me, and when I get it, I'll give it to you. Whatever that is, and look at it and see where it is. And then again, sharing those expectations, I tell myself, look, everybody's underpaid here, include me, right? So because we just can't afford it. But I'm gonna try to get you as close as possible. But you having that, I think pay equity is important. And I think that not having huge gaps in wages based on arbitrary things is important, right? Because ultimately, because you've been intentional about the roles and the jobs, all of these jobs are important. So why would we reduce pay for somebody because they don't have a degree? If they're important enough to hire, they're important enough to pay. Well, is my philosophy there.
Well, thank you so much, Tekoah, for taking the time to share and giving us so many gems to think about and consider. So with that being said, our session is coming to an end, and we will be sure to send out the recording of this session within the next few days. And we hope to also be able to send you some of this presentation that we just saw, so you can take your action items as well as your QR codes and actually put these things into work. As a reminder, the Association for C&Ps hosts events like this throughout the year. So for more information, just check the link that is dropped in the chat so you can see upcoming events. And you can also donate to help us to continue making these sessions free. And there's also a link for that in the chat as well. And we just thank you so much for coming through and experiencing our webinar for today. And we hope you have a marvelous rest of your day. Thanks.